The first known use of quarantine was during the Black Death, 1347 to 1351, a devastating bubonic plague pandemic that wiped out a significant portion of Europe's population. Ships arriving in Venice from plague-stricken areas were required to anchor offshore for 40 days before disembarking, in an effort to prevent the disease from spreading. This 40-day isolation period was called quaranta in Italian, which means 40, and is the origin of the term quarantine. As plague outbreaks continued to threaten Europe, quarantine practices became more widespread. Ports and towns began to establish quarantine stations where people suspected of carrying contagious diseases were isolated. The rules for isolation became stricter, and those arriving from infected areas were not only isolated but also subjected to rigorous health checks, including fumigation of clothing and goods. Quarantine was not only used to combat plague, but also other diseases like smallpox, cholera, and yellow fever. By the 18th and 19th centuries, countries established formal quarantine laws and constructed quarantine stations, especially in major ports, to protect against diseases that were transmitted through travel and trade. In the 20th century, quarantine practices became more sophisticated with the rise of medical knowledge and the development of vaccines and antibiotics. Despite this, quarantine measures continued to be used in response to outbreaks like the Spanish flu, 1918, SARS, 2003, and more recently, COVID-19, 2020. Modern quarantine methods include isolating infected individuals,